I would like to thank Sofiane and thank the colleagues who organized this day, and to hope that the presentation would give some info and some analysis on Syria. I will try in my presentation first to quickly remind you of what I consider to be the 5 phases of the Syrian revolution, turning into an armed struggle and then into a war, and then to see why this Syrian revolution, this Syrian conflict, this Syrian disaster, you might find lots of terms qualifying it. Most of the terms will avoid using revolution, will prefer to move into civil war, into conflict, into massacre, into tragedy, for different reasons. Some of them are related to a certain value judgment that they don't want to have positively while describing the events. Some others are related probably to a different observation and reading of the Syrian situation. But just to start with and to tell you about what I think are the 5 phases that we have gone through until now, at least. You know that it started in March 2011, so we're talking about first phase until August 2011. That's why August will come yearly as a turning point, or as a date with a major event that will change a little bit the configuration of the situation. So the first August 2011 is when the peaceful revolution started to become more and more militarized. People were forced, in a way, to an armed struggle due to the extremely violent reaction of the Syrian regime against demonstrations, due to the fact that gatherings in public places was becoming impossible. More and more people were probably becoming convinced that this regime, like the Iraqi one, like the Libyan one, will not leave just with peaceful demonstrations. So more and more soldiers, officers left the army, more and more young men took weapons, and in August 2011, we can start about a changing moment, about more and more an armed struggle, replacing the first peaceful revolution without ending it, because that will continue until August 2012. So once again, it's in August, it's summer. In August 2012, more or less, it will be the end of peaceful demonstrations that were going in parallel with the armed struggle, because it will become an open war. It's the first time that the Syrian regime will use its airplanes to bomb neighborhoods of Aleppo and Damascus, where the military revolution, if you want, imposed itself in some neighborhoods and controlled some neighborhoods. And in fact, those neighborhoods will be under the control of the opposition since that time, in Aleppo at least. So it's a turning point, because airplanes were used, and now it became more than impossible. In fact, it was the end of the demonstrations going in parallel with the armed struggle. August 2013, once again, we are in August. The chemical massacre that the regime forces committed in the Ghouta of Damascus, where on the 21st of August, in 1 hour, more than 1,400 civilians were killed because of the sarin gas that was used. And based on that, many thought that was what was the only red line that the Obama administration set for Syria and was violated, that this would lead to a certain international intervention, to a punishment, as it was said. And then we saw that there was a deal with Russia, following which the regime delivers or gives its arsenal of chemical weapon, and then it will escape any kind of punishment. It will gain impunity, in fact, and it will be restored legally, in a way, in the international, on the international level, because of that agreement. So committing a massacre turned to become one way of recognizing a certain legitimacy for the regime that denied first that it had the sarin gas, then denied committing the massacre, then accepted to give the arm of the crime. And we had a very bizarre and strange concept in international law, following which the regime accused of committing a crime will give up the arm or the weapon of the crime, and then it will escape any kind of punishment. And I think that was a turning point in the Syrian situation, because it created a feeling that the Syrian people were abandoned, and that the international law was not designed to protect them, that they are not part, in a way, of the universal they are not protected by universal values and universal laws. And I think the rise of Daesh will benefit in a way, indirectly, from that specific moment. That's why the 2nd August, the August 2014, so we have August 2011, 12, 13, and now August 2014 is just few weeks after Baghdadi declared his Islamic State, and the US is preparing to intervene, and it will intervene just a few days after, in September, bombing some targets in Syria. So we're moving into an internationalization of the conflict, Daesh being by itself an international actor, since it has jihadists from different countries. There are already in Syria other jihadists, those who are not in media, the Shia jihadists, who in number exceed the Sunni jihadists. I'm talking about Hezbollah, the Iraqi militias, the Afghani militias, the Iranian officers fighting with the regime against the opposition, and against, in some cases, the Sunni jihadists. So you have an internationalization with now the US and the international alliance bombing in places in Deir ez-Zor and Raqqa, and in some areas around Aleppo, positions or villages controlled by ISIS. Then, August 2015, Russia is preparing its intervention that will start in September. So once again, the summer of 2015 is another turning point, with Russia saving the regime and maybe making it possible for that regime to restore some, to change the balance of power in the conflict itself, to change the configuration of the conflict, and maybe to impose the regime as an actor in a transition or in the post-revolutionary era if the military plan of Russia functions. So we have 5 summers in Syria. We have figures that are that confirm the UN formula about Syria being the worst humanitarian disaster since the First World War. Some people evoke more than 400,000 people killed already. We're talking about 200,000 detainees and people who disappeared. We're talking about more than 11 million displaced and refugees. So almost 50% of the Syrian population is not in its homes and villages and neighborhoods now. 7 inside, 4.5 outside. The demography of some countries is being modified, even if temporarily, but still, when you have in Lebanon more than 1 million refugees in a country with 4 million people, when you have in Jordan more than 600,000, there are some important changes taking place, not to talk about also the Daesh or ISIS modifying the border as well between Syria and Iraq. So in terms of figures, it is a disaster. And with all that time, with all those changing summers that are bringing each time new actors to the conflict, new configuration to the conflict, with all the human disasters, we can still listen or hear or see or read analysis reports in which what is happening is a mixture of conspiracies, is sometimes stories and narratives are rejected. It is about people moving through remote controls. It is about Islamists versus the regime, reducing choices, either Assad or ISIS. So we have sometimes geostrategic considerations replacing the whole Syrian people and replacing what's happening in Syria in a way that political sociology is not adopted anymore to read what's happening, in a way that political science are rejected, and we are much more about some borders, about Saudi Arabia, Qatar, some ABC of international relations brought as if they explain the whole thing. So the question that I think many, at least myself and many friends, keep asking, why is the Syrian people invisible? Why we don't see the Syrians, the daily people in their daily life that you described, Yasser, and that you talk about as well when it comes to their relations with their neighbors, whether it's based on sectarian question or on solidarity or on suffering all those consequences of the war, of the bombing, of the interventions. Why we don't see the Syrian people and their legitimate rights for a regime change or for a better Syria or for dignity? Or the Syrian people are the absent in this scene of political analysis, geostrategic question. And I think there are lots of reasons for that, and that's what I will try to talk about now. The first being the one related to Assad's father, to Hafez al-Assad, who managed between 1970 and 2000 to erase, in fact, the Syrian people from the political negotiations that he always had with the West. Syria was never about the Syrian people. Whenever an ambassador, a foreign officer, official, whenever there is a conference, Syria is not about the inside. It's about the outside. It's about the border. It's about the intervention in Lebanon. It's about the Iraqi questions. It's about the Kurdish-Turkish dynamics. It's about the Arab-Israeli conflict. It's never about Syria, the inside. The Syrian people were made invisible by this kind of politics, and it was not surprising under this to see that in 1982, a terrible massacre was committed by the regime in the city of Hama, and rare were the articles, rare were the media coverage of that massacre. 20,000 people, some people say 17,000, others might reach a 40,000 figure, showing that we have little information about what happened in 1982. It was not, for many actors, an important thing, as long as they were dealing with Syria, the one that occupies Lebanon, the Syria involved in the Arab-Israeli conflict, the Syria fighting the PLO and then compromising with the PLO, the Syria competing with Saddam of Iraq over the leadership of the Arab nation, and that started as of 1970 when Assad reached power in a moment when Nasser was not there anymore. So Hama was absent, and in fact, I think it was a trauma for the Syrians themselves that they couldn't talk about Hama, they did not write about Hama. There were very few texts by Syrians. Most of them were outside Syria, in novels, in some poetry, they evoked Hama, but there was very few work within the memory of the Syrians about Hama itself, due to this question of not only of repression and of the regime, but of just completely deleting the Syrian memory, the inside. And when the revolution started in 2011, I think many Syrians had in mind that while taking pictures and while documenting every single event, and if you go to YouTube and to Dailymotion, you have millions, not hundreds of thousands. In 2012, there was already more than 1 million video on those social media networks. They wanted to document every single moment so that Hama cannot be reproduced. And they thought that in 82, the world did not see us. While now we are showing everything, so definitely the world's reaction will be different. Still, it was not different. And that's for them was another shocking question that you can see in many of the works, many of the drawings, many of the arts. The creativity of the Syrian revolution was incredible in that sense, because they wanted to keep a trace of what they have been going through, since they were afraid that once again, after optimism in 2011, that Hama that is being reproduced now in most Syrian cities and places, this might be forgotten if they do not make the effort to document the work and to document what they have been going through. So why is this once again taking place? What happened in 2000 when Bashar al-Assad seized power? I think there are some conceptions, some perceptions of Syria in 2000 that change a little bit, but change in the wrong direction when it comes to the Syrian people, in the sense that if under Hafez al-Assad it was much more geopolitical questions and it was politics related to the region, under Bashar al-Assad, some started to talk about Syria, the inside. However, they talked about the Syria, the inside, as if there is a president who is young, coming from the West. He did some of his studies in Britain. He's one of us, as Tony Blair said. So he might bring some reforms to Syria. He cannot be cruel, he cannot be criminal, because he studied in the West, which is by itself a very strong culturalistic notion that if you study in the West, you might become civilized, you might kill your people less, etc. And he has a very modern wife, creating associations, sponsoring events on women's rights, on childhood. So this young couple brought some optimism in many circles in the West that they will reform. They will not deal with their society the same way. So you started to read some articles. There are some documents, people traveling to Damascus, following the inauguration of restaurants. Some associations are there, more and more tourism. And they started to look at Syria, the inside, however, now with a different perspective. So it's not about democracy and political reforms. Assad was more into this, what many of his advisors used to call the Chinese option. So you reform economically, you liberalize economically, you open the market, but politically you keep the authoritarian rule because people are not yet ready for democracy. And he kept saying it in many interviews. We need more education. People are not yet ready for democracy. We need more education. So the society is still in its childhood. It will never be recognized as an adult society capable of assuming some choices. We cannot reform politically. And those who will dare, in fact, in 2001, with what was called the Damascus Spring, some forums that were opened, petitions signed by intellectuals calling for the end of the state of emergency, for the release of political prisoners, for the return of political opponents. Many of them will go to jail. Then in 2005, another attempt with the Damascus Declaration. Most of the committee of the Damascus Declaration will go to jail. So nothing will change in that sense politically compared to the father's time. And we were not yet into the violence that we're seeing now, because challenging the regime was still political, was still through articles and petitions, and those who were daring signing them were sent to jail. While under the father, when they moved more into a kind of uprising in '82, they were massacred. And before that, there was also another massacre in the Palmyre jail in Tadmor. And you have lots of work on that that was published much later, like the novel of Mustafa Khalife, like some poems by Faraj Bayraktar. More and more now, you have some work that is being published on that. So 2011, if we go back to that moment with this modern president, the one who is supposedly bringing some reforms to Syria, who might be the exception, as he pretended in the Arab revolutions. He said, I think, to the Wall Street Journal in January 2011, just 2 months before the revolution, that Syria will be an exception. Why? Because he said that our people support us and because they support our foreign policy. While in other Arab countries, revolutions happened because people were opposed to their government's foreign policies, meaning Egypt, normalization with Israel, with the US. So once again, he will bring back the foreign policy to replace internal questions related to human rights, dignity, democracy in a way, and overthrowing the regime. That would be the first slogans of the revolutionaries from day one in Dar'a until today, in fact. What happened while this propaganda was put in place to say that our people support us, that the question is about foreign policy? It is the best way for conspiracy theory to find their basis, to talk about some regional actors wanting to destabilize Syria for its foreign policy. You might find in the Arab world, as well as in the West, among many leftist circles, people who would consider that Syria is being targeted by conspiracies because of its position in support of Hezbollah and the Palestinian resistance. You will have people saying that it is due to the fact that Assad never signed peace with Israel. They are punishing him for that. Then you will have, with time, other theories about Saudi Arabia and Qatar wanting to control everything, and Qatar wanting to have gas pipelines going through Syria, and that Assad did not accept that. So once again, the Syrian people are absent in those narratives, and we're talking about regional actors and not about what is happening inside. Now, with more and more blood, with more and more violence in the Syrian conflict, you started to hear people saying, especially in the West in this case, well, we don't know how to who's killing whom in Syria. It's too complicated. The idea of a complicated Orient, of the complicated East, will appear once again. So it's too complicated. We don't understand. And this will be an excuse not to support any policy towards Syria, not to support any position towards Syria, and not to express a certain solidarity among actors in Western civil societies towards the Syrian tragedy. We don't know. There are contradictory information. Some people are saying that there is no revolution. It's just Islamists against Assad. So what shall we do in these kind of cases? You have this argument. You have another argument that unfortunately President Obama made allusion to recently, that anyway in this region, conflicts have been going on for forever. So we can't stop them. We can't do anything. People are, in a way, maybe it's a caricature now, but people are genetically violent. So we cannot stop them from killing each other. conflicts might continue, and it continues. In fact, it's been now 5 years, and it's getting worse. So what shall we do? We cannot do anything. We don't want to intervene. No? But at the same time, they are intervening, and they are all bombing ISIS or targeting ISIS in some cases, not because ISIS killed Syrians, or not because ISIS killed Iraqis, but because ISIS killed, in a barbaric way, obviously, Western journalists, and they were filmed by the cameras, because they have shown their spectacular violence, and they wanted to show that spectacular violence. So we target them for that, but we don't want to intervene when it comes to those Syrians killing each other, or for a regime killing its people. Once again, as if international law, Geneva Conventions, all settings that should regulate conflicts or end conflicts cannot be applied in Syria because it's too complicated, because they're violent, and because the conflict is so complex with all regional actors in it. Then you have what we might call the self-fulfilling prophecies. It is not a surprise if you leave violence and violent mechanisms in a society that you will have violent reactions. It is not a surprise when you don't have political freedoms for more than 40 years, when you don't have political life for more than 40 years, that against violence you will have violent reactions and responses. It is not a surprise when you have people abandoned and left to death, to the rituals of death, to funerals, when you don't have actors trying to intervene in a way that would support some political options by saying that anyway it's difficult and we don't know who's who, to have some actors who will find allies among Islamic groups. Those Islamic groups will become stronger on the ground, will have their discourse becoming more and more radical. Islam will become a refuge for them. The term Allahu Akbar will be their identity in a way, because it mobilizes. For them, it is against fear. You will move from slogans in demonstrations that you mentioned, واحد 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 الشعب السوري واحد, we're one, the Syrian people is one, or الشعب يريد إسقاط النظام, the people wants to topple the regime, or dignity, freedom, etc. You will move to, oh God, we have no one but you, oh God, Ya Allah, malna ghayrak, Ya Allah. So you have, even when it comes to the term, you can see how the society is moving. And this does not mean that ideologically they are becoming into Islamism as we understand it sometimes in the West. It means that the popular Islam, the one in conservative areas where people are religious, is becoming their security belt, is becoming what protects them from fear and from the barrel bombs that are raining, that are destroying their neighborhood and daily lives. So you have this as a proof that, we told you from the beginning it's Islamists. We told you from the beginning it's not a revolution. This is about those extremist groups who want to topple the regime and who threaten the minorities. So the minority question will become also one important issue. And the minorities, when we are only dealing with them, it means also that we're forgetting the majority. There is only the fear for minorities, as if the majority that has been massacred since 2011 does not really count. We're just scared because some Christians might fear the fall of the regime because Islamists will take power. We're scared because the Ismailis might be in danger. So these kind of arguments also were messages to the majority, to the Sunni Arab majority, that you're not equal to other Syrians when it comes to death, because maybe you're too many, while they are small groups, so they might be exterminated while you're not. But this also means that if thousands are dead, it's not the same impact that it has when it is about minorities. And I think this is a very dangerous message related to the future of those societies, and also related to the universality of human rights and of the value of life itself. Then you have scenes that in my paper I'll try to elaborate more on, scenes of individuals practicing some kind of real barbaric behavior. There is one video about a gentleman called Abu Saqqar. Abu Saqqar promised, it seems, some of his comrades that when he will kill a Syrian regime soldier, he will eat his heart. So there was a video showing that Abu Saqqar starting to eat the heart of a dead soldier. That video will circulate all over social networks, in media. you will have a series of articles about it, showing how barbaric those opponents could be, and saying that it is clear now that everyone is in this war equally barbaric, so we can't do anything once again. While Abu Sakkar was doing this, eating a heart of a dead soldier, there were hundreds of people being killed or injured by bombing, by air raids, by torture in jails. But their death was abstract, was not seen the same way, and they were once again forgotten. They became part of this invisible Syria. Then ISIS came, and of course ISIS knew from the beginning that there is something sensational in the media. There is something exotic when it comes to violence with a knife, when it comes to decapitation, when it comes to execution life. It is not as when you use the modern weapons of the 20th centuries that the West is used to anyway. And you see an air raid, you see an artillery. It is not that shocking. It is part of any war or military scenario. But if you see people using and going back to primitive weapons, and they are filmed, and this is spectacularly well done, in fact, they have different cameras filming that, and they know that they should not do it daily or weekly, because otherwise it will become banal, or it will become something that media is used to. It will lose its impact. They do it, they dose it, they do it once a month to keep the media always alarmed about what Daesh is going to do. So they might decapitate a journalist, they would put a pilot in a cage and burn him. There is not only a criminal potential in Daesh, but there is also an imagination of criminality that is extremely shocking. And that will once again replace the whole Syrian people, replace all the victims of air raids, all the victims of torture, all the victims of bombing. And the media will find in this sensational movies sent by ISIS a way of communication, once again, to show how this conflict is barbaric and we can't do anything, we cannot intervene. Then you have other things, and yes, I'm reminded that I still have 5 minutes. You have things related to between Islamophobia, between that might unify people from left-wing background and right-wing background. Either that the regime is more progressive than its own society, that conservative society, the regime is better than the society in a way, because it tolerates some kind of social conduct that is more liberal, more Western. You're not obliged to put a veil under the Syrian regime. You can consume alcohol under the Syrian regime, while this alternative will be a disaster for women's rights, will have lots of constraints on personal freedoms, and this might alarm some Syrians before telling about the West. But these kind of cliché will find those who will support it from one side, and it will be put at the same time with another discourse related to the fact that we cannot consider that the same values apply in Syria as they apply here. Because there the cultural scene is different, traditions are different. We have a certain conception and a certain definition of revolution. It should be like the French Revolution, it should be like the American Revolution, it should be like revolutions that we know, while what's happening there cannot be defined as a revolution. So in using cultural specificities will be obliging also the Syrians either to follow some Western definitions of what a revolution should be, or that what is happening there is just a civil war. Is there a civil war in Syria? Yes, in a sense. And any revolution has elements of a civil war, because any regime does have a certain social basis defending it and considering that its future is related to it. So there are aspects of civil war. But this cannot deny the fact that, and I will finish here, that there is in Syria today, and there has been in Syria in 2011, 12, 13, and 14, a revolutionary process that started by people in the society who wanted to change the regime. They are from a young generation. They don't want to remain silent. They consider that their parents suffered in silence and they were not vocal enough. So they started demonstrations. Then they took weapons. In some cases, they were defeated. In some other cases, foreign actors imposed themselves on the Syrian scene. They were marginalized. Some of them were converted to civil society activism in Turkey or in Lebanon or in Jordan or in Europe. Others are still working inside. There is a civil society inside. Imagine a country that's being daily bombed by different actors, and still you have some hospitals running in areas that are not under the regime occupation, some of them underground to protect them from the air raids. You have schools that are still running. You have the white helmets or the civil defense that is still saving people under the most difficult conditions. You have people trying to find some ways of providing services. You have charity networks. So this is revolutionary in the sense that civil society in Syria was assassinated and now is being once again reconstructed by the same Syrians who started the revolution and by the same Syrians who are keen on defending their memory and preparing a memory for the future by documenting it. And I will finish with the last word, is that for any possible solution, it's not, of course, the topic of the intervention, to talk about a post-Assad Syria or about the future of Syria. What is definitely needed is to get rid of ISIS and Assad, and it is a condition. You cannot keep the Syrian people in this trap. You cannot keep them in this jail, either Assad or Daesh, because this is also a way of saying that you do not exist. You're either ISIS or Assad. Well, no, it's not true. It's neither Assad nor Daesh, and we cannot keep Syria without a certain form of justice, because impunity has been a disease in the Middle East. And if you keep impunity in that way, no one should wonder later why things are not really good between different parts of the world. And the question, why do they hate us, would be always present in some way or another. And this is not an excuse. It does not at all I'm not saying that it is a Western responsibility. It is an international responsibility and a Syrian responsibility, but one should keep that in mind. Otherwise, double standards will always create frustrations and will radicalize people more. Sorry for being long, and thank you very much.